if you want massive performance improvement, you have to accept that performance is a feature of the system, and that if you want to change the system, the first thing you have to do is change your thinking about what creates a great organization. He said because it's your responsibility as the manager to create that system that allows people to perform. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, what you need to do is you need to go and read a book. And the book was called The Machine That Changed the World. And this is the story of how Henry Ford in the early 1900s built cars. Now, Ford had some very good things about the market at that particular time, which was it didn't really have a lot of demand from customers in terms of variety. They all just wanted the same thing over and over again. But that's not the same in Fife Council, I guess, is it? No? The other thing that he had was he did have a specific problem that he had high volumes of demand for the same thing over and over again, but he didn't have the people required to be able to meet the demands. So what he did was he brought in lots of immigrant workers. In order to make it easier for the immigrant workers, what he did was he said, right, every person will do the same task over and over again. And he broke the process flow into what we would call today functions or separate functions, functionalization, and everybody just had to do their own bit. And what do you think the effect was like on morale when you're doing the same thing over and over again? Bored, absolutely. So then a guy called Frederick Winslow Taylor came along and he said, I'll tell you what you need to do. He said, you need to motivate the people. And in order to motivate the people, what you need to do is you need to set them targets and service standards and use bonuses and incentives. And Ford said, great, I'll do that. And what he found was that at that point in America, by using that system, he was able to pay the worker more than they could get anywhere else in the rest of the US for doing the same job. But given the conditions within the factory, and what I don't mean is kind of grimy, dirty conditions, what I mean is the type of work that they were doing, which was boring, repetitive work over and over again, with a supervisor whose job it was to plan the activity and manage their activity and motivate them. How long do you think the average worker stayed at Ford? Now, there's a prize for this if anybody gets it right, or the person that gets nearest to it. 6 months. Anyone else? 9 months? 12 weeks, is that more than 6 months or less than 6 months? 3 months, okay. Anybody else? We can't have Lynn win this, by the way. So, 1 week, there you go. A process mapping pad, so there's no excuse for not getting out into the work in mapping processing. The average worker stayed at Ford for 5 days. He became known as the 5-day man. So what can we learn from this today in terms of service organizations? Well, the first thing is that service is different from manufacturing. All you have to worry about in manufacturing, if you're making cars, is what color, and put a few different variants within the car. But in service, there is much, much higher variety. But the most important thing that we can learn from Ford is that Ford brought a typical way of running an organization to the world at that particular time. And the way that Ford thought about the organization was the perspective was top-down. Top-down means that the manager is always right, the manager knows best about the work, and that the manager is, kind of a bit remote from the work, but even so, they still know the best way how to do it. The design was silo working or functionalization, however you want to call it. As I say, decision making is remote from the work. Measures are related to things like budget. So most managers today spend their time managing budgets, managing activity, setting targets, thinking about output and service standards. And the management ethic is really about work on the people, set the budgets, manage the budgets. And the attitude to citizens, or customers, however you want to call it, is we know best. And what that book says is that if you compare that to a different way of managing, which is really a way of managing that Toyota brought in about 50 years ago, that the difference is phenomenal.